This bamboo is longer, more flexible, and very much alive. And when your flashy routine cannot keep up with the speed and elusiveness of this thing here, all I can say is that you will be in deep trouble.
As you gentlemen know, red means danger. Therefore, I advise to you people not to step into this warning arena. If you want to go on living, start here. Go back downstairs. Life is precious.
I'm telling you, it's difficult to have a rehearsed routine to fit in with broken rhythm. Rehearse routines lack the flexibility to adapt. Surprised?
Little fellow, you must have given up the hope of living.
On the contrary, I do not let the word death bother me.
Same here, baby.
Then what are you waiting for?
Oh, Bruce Lee. His movies are so good. Movies like The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, Way of the Dragon, and Enter the Dragon. Wait, I feel like I'm forgetting something.
Hey guys, look what I brought! Holy shit, is that
Game of Death?
Ah!
Fuck this movie. Might as well tell you about it. So it's 1972, and Bruce just finished Way of the Dragon, and it's the highest grossing movie Hong Kong had ever seen. And after writing it, producing it, and directing it, Bruce was super fired up and wanted to make another movie. So he starts on Game of Death almost instantly in the same year, and he's making good progress. Bruce was building this up to be his ultimate movie. He was going to use this to not only make another cash cow, but to preach his philosophy of martial arts at the same time, using his new style of fighting, Jeet Kune Do, as the focal point. The main message Bruce wanted to achieve with Game of Death was that martial arts should have fluid movement, and this is shown in the movie with the fighters being picked off as their style adheres to strict patterns. The plot outline that Bruce had made for Game of Death centered on him playing the character Hai Tian, who is forced by a criminal syndicate to battle his way up a 5-level pagoda to retrieve some valuable artifact with the help of other fighters. Lee would have been joined by several other martial artists, as they fight past other martial artists with different styles. Floor 1 would have had a master of the kick-oriented style of Hapkido, followed by the master of the praying mantis style of Kung Fu on the second floor. The third floor featured Danny Nisanto, a close friend of Lee's and a master of Filipino martial arts, and then Jihan Zoy on the fourth floor. On the fifth floor, Bruce would have come face to face with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, whose fighting style mirrors Bruce Lee's. So everything looked like it was going well. Bruce was pumping out footage and being super focused, and there was nothing that could stop him from achieving his biggest goal. F*** you, Warner Brothers. How dare Warner Brothers take Bruce Lee away from his greatest movie and make him the star in his greatest movie of all time? With Bruce Lee being a mega success in Hong Kong, he was bound to attract attention from the West, in this case, Warner Brothers, who wanted to make Enter the Dragon with him. So Bruce dropped everything to get to filming Enter the Dragon. So this meant he had to put Game of Death on hold. No worries at all, he can just come back to Game of Death after Enter the Dragon. Shit. So with Bruce being a little f***ing dead, he obviously couldn't finish Game of Death. So the producers of Game of Death, Golden Harvest, had to find a way to finish the movie with the 40 minutes of footage Bruce had left behind. So Golden Harvest brought on Enter the Dragon director Robert Clouse to write and direct the new story for the rest of Game of Death. Wait, new story? Man, they really did it, didn't they? So yeah, the finished version of Game of Death follows a totally different story. The story this time around follows martial arts star Billy Lowe, who is dealing with a criminal syndicate who want to extort him for money. After Billy does his best Bruce Lee impression and beats the shit out of the syndicate's thugs and chooses not to work with them, the syndicate leader, Dr. Lan, orders his murder. After the attempt is made by a syndicate assassin, Billy uses the attempt to fake his death, but after Dr. Lan threatens Billy's fiancée Ann Morris, Billy must come out of hiding to save her. So this story is nothing like the original plot. There is no 5-level pagoda, there are no other martial arts helping out our main character, nothing. There isn't even a mention to a pagoda. Instead, the intended floors are now part of a restaurant owned by the syndicate. Apparently the reason for the drastic change in story is because writer-director Robert Clouse wanted to give audiences something different. After Bruce Lee's death, a lot of movies went on to copy the Game of Death structure, but that's a dumb reason, just keep the original story. Pretty much the entire structure of the original plot was to give us any action as possible. Fuck, that's right, the fight scenes. How the hell do they finish this movie without Bruce Lee? Oh, So yeah, they had to get a new actor to double for Bruce Lee in this one. Bruce was actually portrayed by 4 different people for Game of Death. They were either body doubles for simple dialogue scenes or stunt actors who looked like him. And boy, did none of them look like Bruce. The double who gets the most screen time was Kim Tai-chung, and trust me, we'll talk more about him later. Throughout the movie, these Bruce Lee wannabes do their best to be Bruce. Robert Clouse did all sorts of things to help sell the illusion. He would film the doubles from certain angles, position the lighting in a certain way, and other techniques. Do you think they worked? Do you think Clouse and friends were able to trick people into thinking these saps were Bruce? By me asking these questions, you already know the answer. It didn't have to be this way either. Partway through the movie, Billy gets murked by that syndicate assassin guy and has to get plastic surgery. Now, if you have a normal big head brain like I do, you see this as a great way to bring in the different looking actors. Do you think Robert Clouse and gang thought of that? What the fuck do you think they thought? Of course, Clouse didn't think of that. Instead, Billy goes around the movie wearing these dumbass disguises. I swear, every other scene with Billy, he either has a stupid f***ing beard or big f***ing sunglasses. And to make things worse, they use old footage of Bruce from his older movies. Every now and then, usually for reaction shots, the movie will cut to footage of Bruce to help make it seem like he's actually in the movie more than he is. Sometimes, it looks okay. Like the scene where that assassin shoots Billy. They cut to scenes from Fist of Fury where Bruce is running towards the camera to get shot. It works fine enough, and it works a little bit better if you figured out the context of the original clip. But then you get stuff like them cutting out a picture of Bruce and putting on the double in post. I don't know who said, yeah, that looks good, because I want to Bruce Lee kick them out a fucking window. It really doesn't matter either way because it's always super obvious when they're using old footage because the quality becomes ass bad and the continuity just disappears. It does get pretty funny though because towards the end of the movie they just don't bother hiding the doubles. So we get really funny scenes like this. Alright, how else does this movie suck? This movie is nothing but a big brown hot dog on Bruce Lee's legacy and everything he built up. Changing the story and having doubles is pretty scummy, but that doesn't compare to what other shit this movie does. Can I just point out that everyone besides like one character actually matters? This movie is fucking filled to the brim with C-list actors that nobody cares about or remembers. This sounds like a dumb complaint, but Bruce would always try to cast colorful people in roles to make them more memorable. Like that henchman guy from Way of the Dragon.
Excuse me. Watch where you're going. Oh, sure.
And at least Bruce knew how to show off his actors. Look at how Bruce shows off Chuck Norris here. Then look at how they introduce Steiner.
I would like Miss Morris to leave.
I'm afraid we can't do that, Billy. We're all in this together. Now, would you mind stepping out of the car? You've got until tomorrow morning to call us. It's the last time we're going to ask, Billy.
None of the other actors in this movie are important. They aren't friends of Bruce, and they're definitely not other martial artists. Look at how Steiner's throwing these punches. What a pussy. None of these people would have ever worked with Bruce if he was still alive. These are just actors filling up boring roles. It probably didn't help that most of Bruce's friends didn't want to be in this piece of crap. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who has a role in the original footage, was asked to come back to do more scenes as his character. But he, and along with pretty much everyone asked to do the same, thought the entire project was in poor taste. But none of this compares to what else they do in this movie. No, I'm not f***ing with you. In Game of Death, Klaus and crew thought it was a good idea to use footage taken at Bruce Lee's funeral and use it in the movie. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the ultimate in bad taste. Is there anything even good in this movie? Even though this movie stinks on ice, there is something here that doesn't make me want to eat my shorts. Of course, the main draw for this movie is that it has some of the final fights Bruce Lee ever recorded. And they're great. This is some of the best martial arts action you'll ever see. But it doesn't really matter much because the final cut butchers the fights to make them really good, but not godlike. Almost all of the other fights in this movie are okay. Then they are staged pretty well, lots of impressive moves, and they feel like something Bruce Lee would have done for the most part. The other action scenes were done by Sammo Hung. You know Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan's friend during the 70s and 80s Sammo Hung, Enter the Fat Dragon Sammo Hung, Ip Man 2 co-star Sammo Hung. But in the late 70s and early 80s, Sammo Hung was one of the best in the martial arts movie business. So his brilliance here is always welcome. Here he is in Game of Death doing some fighting. Whoa! And here he is in Enter the Fat Dragon beating up a Bruce Lee lookalike. Whoa!
我話俾你知，李小龍係我心目中嘅英雄偶像，唔能夠俾你破壞。如果你想學佢，就要用多啲腦。
The only non-Bruce Lee fight scene I will spotlight is the fight with Bob Wall. This is a highlight mostly because it actually features Bob Wall, a Bruce Lee regular who also appeared as a villain in Way of the Dragon and Enter the Dragon. This is also one of the few parts in the movie where they actually try to hide the doubles, and it works relatively well. The only other good thing about this movie is the music. The music for Game of Death was done by John Barry, and his score, in my opinion, is one of his best. But the Enter the Dragon score is miles better. So there we go, 2 points for Game of Death. Hey guys, this is Cameron in post, and as I was editing this segment in particular, I realized I should have talked about the Bruceploitation genre that came out around the mid-70s, but I didn't do that when I was doing the original recording session, so I'm going to talk about it now and just put this right in the middle of the chapter. So the Bruceploitation genre happened around the mid-70s after Bruce Lee's death, and all these movies that came out around this time that were martial arts movies usually centered on Bruce Lee lookalikes in their own kung fu movies. Of course, Bruce Lee wasn't alive, so they had to have stand-ins like Game of Death. So we had people like Bruce Lai, L-I, and Bruce Lee, L-E, and they would just star in these low-budget kung fu movies and pretend to be Bruce Lee without having, I don't know, the class of bullshit like Game of Death. The reason why I'm talking about Bruceploitation movies is because Game of Death is considered to be part of the Bruceploitation genre. You know, it's a movie that doesn't have Bruce Lee in it, but it's somehow a class above Bruceploitation because it actually has Bruce Lee footage in it. Bruceploitation in of itself could have its very own For Your Avoidance because there's a lot of trash in this movie that really comes from just a bad place and a disrespect for Bruce Lee. Some of these movies like to pass off like they're being a tribute to Bruce Lee. Like I feel like one of the biggest and well-known Bruceploitation films is, I think it's called Goodbye Bruce Lee. It's a movie where Bruce Lee fights his way out of hell and flies away at the end of the movie. He fights James Bond, he fights Clint Eastwood. It's really strange. A lot of the Bruceploitation movies have really funny names. Like you have Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, the mini clones of Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee's Last Game of Death, and it's all really bad. Like none of these movies are good. There is one good Bruceploitation movie that we will be talking about later, but I'm gonna wait until we get to that. There were still original kung fu movies coming out in the mid-70s. Like Jackie Chan was slowly up and coming. I believe that movies like One-Armed Boxer and One-Armed Swordsman were coming out. And movies like The 36th Chamber of Shaolin and that whole series was still going. Sammo Hung was beginning to make his rise in the Hong Kong martial arts film business. But it really didn't matter because people wanted to see more of Bruce Lee. And if that meant having someone who looked a little bit like him be in a movie and do some kung fu kicks, then the people would buy that. Some of these Bruceploitation movies made a lot of money just because people wanted to see something about Bruce Lee. One of my favorite Bruceploitation movies is the Green Hornet movie that came out around 79, I think. What it is it's essentially the Green Hornet TV series from, I believe, the late 60s, which had Bruce Lee in it. He was the sidekick in that movie. He wasn't the Green Hornet. But what they did was this film producer and their son bought the movie rights to the TV series The Green Hornet, and they stitched together all of these episodes to make a plot. But it really doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of fight scenes spread across an hour and 20 minutes. But sadly, the rest of the Bruceploitation genre isn't this colorful. Most of this stuff is just fun to point and laugh at, but once you actually sit down to watch a Bruceploitation movie, it's very boring. But Bruceploitation is relevant in this video because, well, that's what Game of Death is. Game of Death is a Bruceploitation movie. Okay, now we're gonna cut back to the video. Bye. Okay, there's nothing else to this. We're done. Oh shit, there's another movie I have to talk about. Do the hustle! Do the hustle! I don't know whose idea it was to make a sequel to Game of Death in 1981, but it was a good idea. This technically isn't a sequel to Game of Death. Its maiden name is Tower of Death, but for the English release, it was made to a sequel through the dub. So they changed the main character to Billy Lowe, but the story has no connection at all to the first Game of Death. Damn, this movie is already winning points. This movie is quite interesting. The movie is still made in the same way as the first Game of Death, with this movie also using old footage of Bruce Lee and doubles to make it feel that Bruce was still totally alive in the 80s. But they did the unthinkable. They actually made it work. When the first Game of Death used old Bruce Lee footage, it felt like they were just slapping it in and just didn't care. But in Game of Death 2, they actually planned the production around the old footage. Continuity is not really a problem in this movie. It's still there, but it's not as jarring. And the fighting, oh god, the fighting. I thought the fighting in Game of Death was pretty good. The fighting in Game of Death 2 is amazing. The martial arts in this are a lot more fast-paced than the fights of Bruce Lee, but they still totally feel like something that Bruce would have staged. Kim Tai-chung, who played Bruce in the first Game of Death, returns as Bruce for this one, and he kicks ass in this. The story for Game of Death 2 is very simple, and is really meant to take us to different fights. The plot follows Billy Lowe as he tries to uncover who wants to kill him, and then he fucking dies. Yeah, Bruce's character Billy fucking eats it and dies. And he dies for real, he doesn't come back. And to prove it, they use real footage of Bruce Lee's funeral again. God damn it. Well, at least it's more tasteful than last time. This is more of a heartfelt tribute to Bruce Lee. I'm cool with this. So with Billy being a little dead, his brother Bobby becomes the main character, with Bobby also being played by Kim Tai-chung. The rest of the movie is fucking nuts and never really slows down, which isn't bad. Out of all of the Bruce Lee movies made after Bruce Lee's death, this one is my favorite. If you're a proper fan of kung fu action, then you can't go wrong with Game of Death 2. I feel like we all learned a very important lesson today. It goes to show, in the entertainment industry, everyone can be replaced. But joke's on them, they try to replace Bruce Lee. The only reason why I could see someone watching this movie is to see how a clusterfuck like this turned out. And if you've been paying attention, you know why that's a bad idea. But I don't like ending things on a downer. So I want to end with this. If you want to watch all the currently existing footage of Bruce Lee's original vision of Game of Death, it's not that hard to find. Almost every home media release of Game of Death includes the original footage as a bonus feature. And I'll also recommend you the documentary Bruce Lee, A Warrior's Journey. Not only is it a good retrospective on the life of Bruce Lee, but in the last 40 minutes it showcases all the original footage. Well, I did it. I was able to save you all from the treacherous Game of Death. Hopefully my services won't be called upon again, but if the Virgin signals ever flash across the sky again, I'll come back. But until then, just stick to these.
Ah!